All right, so welcome primarily, I guess this will be for Heather. I guess we are doing a distributed finance and legal guild meeting that was postponed last week because Heather and I were at the Community Land Trust Summit. And because of scheduling issues, we're going to be doing this in two parts. And so part number one is happening on October 24th. And it's sort of, I'm proposing that this is a bit of a modified session where we really are just focused on bylaw comments. So we'll be kind of diverting from normal procedure a little bit to do that. Unless there's anything, actually, I guess let's stick with, even though it's a split meeting, let's sort of stick with our standard protocol. And so the first thing that we do is make sure that we start off in a good way. And so we take a little time to ground ourselves, both literally and metaphorically. So we bring ourselves into the landscape. We acknowledge the land as a way of bringing ourselves perspective and a reminder about how this whole thing works. So the land was here before we were, the land will continue on after we are gone. We are only here as human beings because the land saw fit to find a niche for us. And and we start our meetings that way as a reminder that the whole point of what we're doing together is really just to find ways to be in right relationship with each other and all our relations. And so everything that we are doing is in that context of how can we be good relations and how can we be good ancestors to ourselves, to each other, to our communities, to the human world, to the more than human world. So how do we do what we can to find whatever right relationship whatever right relationship means, and to heal any harms that may happen along the way. And in doing this, we acknowledge that we are tapping into Indigenous wisdom, and I express my gratitude for all of the wisdom keepers in all of the different traditions who have guarded this knowledge and passed it on and shared it with us so that we can tap into it today. And I know I could use a couple deep breaths just to sort of land myself here. And so I invite you to just take a moment, let go of any busyness that you might be carrying in with you, any heaviness, any tension. Just take a moment to rediscover the breathing that's been happening all this time. Feel the weight of your body in your chair. Take a moment in your mind's eye to see where you are in the landscape. See where you are in the room and how the room is in the building and how the building sits on the land. And take a moment to look around in all the four directions, just to remind yourself of who is sharing that space with you. So look to the north and to the east, to the south and to the west. And take one more deep breath in, breathing in from all your relations in all the directions. And on the exhale, just let go of anything that keeps you from being present, keeps you from showing up today. And you might want to come back into the room, wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, And let's have a check-in that can also be a little bit of a focus. So check-in question is just what's on your mind today and how you doing? And in addition to going over the bylaws draft, is there rules of association? Is there anything else that's on your mind for today? So Roland, Becca, me. So Roland, over to you.
Uh, uh, I don't, there's nothing else for me today. I am consciously trying to set down any burdens that I feel like I have so that I can focus on this. So over to Becca.
Yeah, likewise. And I just want to note that I didn't answer Roland's question in the email about have I talked to Joey or not
Steph.
Heather, but Steph. And I think I left with the understanding that we were going to wait until we finished this before doing that. But if I'm wrong, I'm happy to initiate a process with them. Although extra busy until the election, so also good to, if we can wait a couple more weeks. And other than that, just focusing on the documents. Good. Over to you, Ben.
Cool. And actually, I think that is kind of document and next steps with the document, because there was, we have a plan and then life happens. And so I think there were some tasks on the list that were sort of nice if we could get to them. And now we've moved on. Now that the bylaws are actually drafted, we have a different, from this point forward, our reconnection strategy will be a little different. So cool. Then that, and I think that that's good to keep in mind. And actually, I'm reminded of the value of protocol and what is often in my understanding of in Indigenous circles when people are talking about ceremony and protocol, a lot of times it really is lessons learned about good habits and how easy it is to skip the good habits trying to get things done quickly. So I'm reminding myself of going slow to go fast. And in that same spirit, one of the things that I've been sort of noticing as a good general pattern is start with the big picture and before you get into the detail. And so I'm going to propose we do the 2 rounds before we get into any particulars in the document, where we kind of say what do we think of as the purpose for the rules of association? What do we need it to do? Like what's its core function? And I think also trying to get some clarity on, sort of nice if and absolutely necessary. And recognizing what are some of the limits in the document, like what it can and can't do. And so basically just kind of a starting point. Let's all go around and sort of what's the goal really for the rules of association. And we'll go around once, everyone has a first share, then we'll go around a second time and people can react to what they're hearing from each other. And I wonder if by that point we actually will have covered some of the things. So 2 quick whip arounds and we'll see where we land then. And the circle as I see it is Roland, Becca, me, and does anyone want to start? Or do you want me to start?
I don't want to start.
I can start. Great idea, Ben, to step back. I think number 1 goal is to get a legal status entity set up so that we can start inviting people to join it. Number 2 goal would be to have it clearly spell out what people who are joining, what roles are, as much as belongs in this document as opposed to other documents. And I think there's at least one more, maybe 2 more, which is one more is if and when disagreements happen that there's that reach the level of, are we following our basic rules of association or not, that the power and lines of authority and decision making are as clear as possible. If push comes to shove, like, we need this person to leave you know, the co-op, and we're doing it in a legal way. I think maybe there was a 4th one, but I can't remember what it is. So over to Ben.
Oh, is that over to me?
If we're going in order of Circle and Roland.
Okay, I didn't realize that you were passing on. I thought you were thinking about is there anything else? And I was just jotting down notes. And enough clarity in our documents that both in the rules of association and the supporting materials, that people know what joining means. You know, what's it mean? How do I join? What am I buying into? And the degree that it's possible, we want to think through the conflict resolution. Well, I wrote it down as conflict resolution. And yeah, that's where I think it gets challenging, because there are in some ways I think it's handled as much as it can be, because the enabling legislation basically dictates almost all of these things in terms of you know, how things can get resolved. And there are a few things that you can tweak, but the basic structure is kind of baked into it. So it's kind of good news and bad news. It's good news in that we don't really have to, there's not a lot we can do around it, except there's sort of these categories that we can anyhow, we can talk through that. But yeah, I think that's where it gets tricky, is that I'm not sure how much it can do in that regard. And it is trying to think through, I think it's thinking through the potential scenarios with, how do I want to say it? I think it's also taking it as a whole, you know, sort of taking the people who are currently involved in it, and the people who we imagine are likely to be attracted to it, and the processes that we have that are outside of the rules. So it's kind of like balancing what the rules do versus what the culture does, I guess, is a way of saying it. But yeah, that feels to me like I think that is the nub. To the degree that we can, we want to be creating a safety net. I guess that's basically it, is the rules of association are kind of our safety net. So it's like, if things do fall through the cracks, you know, what's the last defense that we make sure that we're careful, and that we have the tools and we have as many of the tools as available to us as we can. So over to you, Roland.
I think, I guess for me, so the rules of association are the bylaws, right?
Yeah.
So, the bylaws are kind of, I think I'm just going to be paraphrasing or saying it in a different way what you just said, Ben. I think the bylaws are kind of the point of translation between what the systems that are in place in our current culture that don't work and and how we're trying to address the lacuna of the of the current system. So it's how to keep the bylaws at the same time simple and um so that the focus, so it's this balance point between the organization is not the bylaws, that the bylaws don't overtake who we are as an entity, and at the same time be able to be a point of translation between the two worlds, because being in relation means that we have this semi-permeable membrane where things that are not quite working in the general culture can still make its way into the organism um, of us. So see, the legalese and the way I speak, it's a very challenging coupling.
Yep.
So I guess we're doing 2 rounds. So back to Becca.
Yeah. Sort of reaction response.
Well, I'm glad you spoke, Roland, because I think you did add a very important nuance layer that I didn't hear in what either of us said. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add right now. Over to Ben.
Thanks. Yeah, Roland, I actually, a point of translation between the two feels like that's like the linchpin. And it really is. We know what we're wanting to do on our side, and we know how they talk about things on the other side. And we're just trying to create a bit of a translation. And that actually makes me, I'm going to be unintentionally proud of, the switching terms. Basically there is a complete parallel. A director is a steward, a committee is a guild, an officer is a caretaker, or whatever the term is we picked for it. And I think that's enough of a shift to say, in our system looks very similar to yours. There's a board and there's the C-suite, who are in between them, and they're the employees. That's just we're talking about them. We see them in a different relationship to each other. So that I find that really helpful. Yeah, I'm really glad that we did this. And it is also, I think it's that understanding too of that there's gonna be, yeah, it's a point of translation. I was just thinking about, part of the challenge here is no amount of pre-planning or anticipation or careful terminology is going to prevent misunderstandings and conflict. You know, it's like, so it's sort of what this is a very useful process because it gets us to get clearer and clearer and clearer about what we mean by things. But in the end, it's one document, and how do we keep that in perspective, I guess. Okay, cool. So that's, oh no, back to you, Roland, for your second go.
Well, I feel encouraged now. So I'm going to now say that a part of what I was saying in terms of the points of translation between these different things is that the we or the farm, or I'm not quite sure what term to use, that the land, that as stewards of the land, we view the land as an organism that we are part of, that we are members of, that requires protection from a quote unquote dominant system that views it not as a living thing, but as a living being, but as an object. And that it's that part of the translation that's needed is so that we're able to actually act like we are part of something alive, and that because we are also part of the dominant system, that we are in the position to protect this thing that is alive, to protect the life of it. And I will try not to get overly metaphysical, because I realize that that might not be detrimental to, but this feels sort of foundational to me in terms of trying to find a way of bridging the difference between these two things. So I am done. I don't know what to do now.
Well, I'm going to act as facilitator and segue us to the next round, which is a challenge for me because I want to dive into your abstract stuff because I think it's very cool. And I do think it's relevant. I think that it is actually the kind of the devil's in the details about translating that. And okay, jump in anytime if it feels like I'm getting too tangential, but I'm just thinking about, Roland, the conversation you and I had about two-eyed seeing and the difference between binocular and monocular vision. And so I'm hoping this is relevant. You know, we were talking about two-eyed seeing is really what allows perspective, right? You can't see depth through one eye. You have the same image, but it's flattened. And so it's easy to be tricked by, you know, false clues about size and things like that. And I think what we're talking about here is we're seeing things in 3D, and the current culture only sees things in 2D. And so in some ways, what we're looking at looks exactly like what they're seeing, but we're seeing it with depth and they're seeing it just as a sort of a surface shot. And so we can talk about like the land as organism for the legal structure, that doesn't matter. What matters is it's our private property and we get to do with it what we want to do with it, right? That's the rules of the game. This is ours. You can't tell us what to do here. And we're going to treat it like an organism. You know, we're going to treat it with respect. We're going to treat it like a living thing. But that's none of your business. You know, your business from the legal system is to say, this is our private property, and we get to do with it what we want. And as shareholders, we get to organize ourselves the way we want. That's what we get to do. And then underneath it, we know we see more depth in that. So we have retranslated the board of directors not as the overseers who, with the resources, who get to say yes or no, but as a wise council that brings together multiple perspectives. So same entity, actually the original purpose, it's just that purpose kind of shifted. So anyhow, I think that we're going to see more depth in it than they're going to see, and that's okay. It can kind of look flat from the outside. And so in some sense, it really is just a translation of a very conventional set of rules of association. And we just tweaked a couple of the things. So I guess the question is, how do we want, now that we've had this conversation, how do we want to tackle sort of the item by item things in the document? I can bring up, I've got it open already, so I can share it on screen. And I'm just going to put that around the circle. What do you think the best way of talking through the items is? We can go item by item. You could go each and talk about what are your biggest ones. Whatever sounds good, and open to suggestions. So Roland, any ideas about how this would work best for you?
I'm kind of agnostic. I think um, possibly a mix of the two, item by item to start, and that an item may come up that is. I know that there's a few questions that I had or comments that I made that applied to more than one. So it could be, you come up to an item and it's like, oh, well, actually, there's a few like that, or this yeah, I think
Are we back?
I froze for a minute too. Did you
Okay.
did you hear me?
Item by item, but jump around if there are things that are together.
Yeah, and then I passed to Becca.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I meant to try to go through all my comments and pick out like the ones that are substantive, but I didn't have time to do that. Most of my comments are not very substantive, or just,
Then let's do that. We can go item by item and then just kind of like that's a formatting thing, or that,
frozen again. Maybe we should try turning off our video.
not can you are you
I'm suggesting that we try turning off video, since we're not really going to be looking at each other anyway, and the internet might do better without video.
I have turned mine off. Okay, and you can see the screen?
Yeah,
Yep.
although I can see my version of it much better than I can see your version of it. I'm not
Okay.
sure is this really going to allow simultaneous? I don't know, but
Yeah, it should. You mean if you put any changes in?
yeah.
Yeah, it should.
Well, I'll let you be the one to put the changes in, but hopefully I'll be able to see them. And if I can't, I'll revert to watching your screen. Now, of course, I can't tell if you're not talking, or if you're actually frozen. I am not hearing anything. Hello, hello.
Cool. All right. And I'll just do
I don't think this internet connection is good enough to do this.
Well, can you hear me, Becca?
Yeah.
Yep, Ben's back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
All right. And we only have you till 11, right, Becca?
I have until 11:30.
Oh, awesome. Cool. All right. I'm still gonna, I think it'll be,
Can we try it? Should we try it without the screen share to see if that's better?
yeah, actually, that's what I was wondering. Yeah. Right. Let's just do it the old-fashioned way and read along at the same time. Um, so in part one, I put some comments but I don't, they're just, information. So we
Yeah.
can totally skip them. And then the first is a formatting thing, the two A's here. I think that's what you're referring to. On
Yeah,
mine, the numbering all looks fine.
well, on that one it got fixed, but there's a bunch of them below that at some point you added something and it didn't get fixed. So I would just check it through.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, the numbering is always screwy. It's automatic numbering and
Well,
it
it was
doesn't.
funny because I was really confused and I was adding a comment and then you were in editing it at the same time I was and you fixed it as I was making the comment about some of the numbering.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that was actually, I opened the document I was going to add one thing and I opened the document and all of the numbering had been removed. And I don't
Um,
know
Oh,
how. And it was just like a formatting thing, like
yeah.
anyhow, a bad save. So anyhow, I had to recreate it. Okay, so that's the next thing I put was this is a kind of a trivial thing, but for membership classes for Class C, we can call it anything we want. That's the thing with, it's Class A, Class B, Class C is what counts, and whatever name we put on it is really just a handle for ourselves. Um, Anyhow, it's not a very important point.
so are we going over your comments as well, Ben?
Um, I was only going to go over the ones where I was highlighting that there could be some discussion, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
So we're at 2.3
yeah, 2.3.
B, and I think community partners probably more inclusive than neighbors because
Mhm.
it's going to include anyway, neighbors could be misconstrued as actually
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
individuals who live there, whereas community partner suggests organizations
yeah.
Agreed.
Cool. Um, oh, and then similarly, I put in that we wanted people that were sort of geographically nearby and First Nations. And those are all things like we could make it Pender or we could make it the CRD or the Lower Mainland or, but
Do you see my comment on that?
I see it.
oh, I see. It's I get it.
Okay.
Well, and that's the question. Yeah, is Cascadia too big? Um, because I think there's something about like actually having local neighbors be have some preference, like the people who are directly impacted by what we're doing or more
Hmm.
directly impacted. So anyhow, and these are, not really, it's not a big deal one way or the other.
Defer to you too on that question. Um, do you want to try to decide it now or?
No, no, I don't. I mean, I think it's if there's any strong thoughts, we're gonna walk through this with Heather as well. So, yeah, I think it's really just any strong ideas or even weak ideas. All right. I'm hearing
So
nothing. Go
the
ahead.
difference between Class C and Class D is the community partner is someone who is either on Pender or nearby or First Nations, and Class D is, and I was looking at Becca's comment, and it's also my question that Class D is the timeshare holder.
No, no, Class D is guests. So in a traditional multi-stakeholder co-op, there'd be the customers. And the timeshare are a timeshare has both a Class A and a Class B share. They own a set. So that's the Class A and Class B shares are kind of are halves of a whole. And so a timeshare would just have less than 100 A and B shares. That's how that would work.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to go down and remind myself what the share. I find it really confusing to have the membership in a separate section from the shares, because it's like then I have to keep paging back and forth between them to try to figure out, okay, what are these different classes? And so I
Yeah.
think that's my biggest concern about this document is the lack of clarity about these things. I still don't think.
Well, and it's I think it's there's a couple facts that I think hopefully will explain it all, right? So membership classes and share classes are not the same thing. And the membership classes are the stakeholders and how people get representation, and that you can have different combinations of shares and classes. And so for if you really it is Class A and B shares are breaking apart ownership into two components. So there's legal ownership and then use of. And those two shares allow us to have people like Roland and I who would only have Class B shares, who would get access to and using the resources. And then people like Steph who may only have Class A shares. And the responsibilities by the share class allows us to sort of assign different obligations and rewards to those different classes. But anyone can have Class A and Class B. And so that's why then the stakeholder classes are slightly different than the shares types.
So can we use a completely different nomenclature instead of A, B, C, and D for membership, like 1, 2, 3, and 4? I mean, like, just because it so makes the brain think that they're corresponding to the share types.
I don't know. That may be a lawyer question, because I've only ever seen them lettered, both of them, but I don't suppose that it matters.
But or start with E, F, and G. I mean, like, it's just, anyway, I don't know. It's too.
I think starting with E, F, and G would make it worse, actually, because then it would make it sound like they are totally different, and they're apples and oranges.
And do they have to both be called class, the membership and the share?
I've only ever seen them referred to as classes.
So I think there are two things that I was thinking it would be good to keep in mind, or three things. There's what do we need to discuss, and then part of what we need to discuss is what are questions that are best, that belong to Bill and Elliot.
Right.
And then the other one is what needs to be in the bylaw, and what what can just be in the operations manual. So it's sort of like, what can we talk about? What do we need to be able to then pass it over to Bill and Elliot? I think is if we can identify those bits that we say, okay, Bill and Elliot, what do we need to tell them about it? And then leave it like that. How's that sound?
That sounds right to me. It's also the other thing too is that I don't think we're going to hand somebody the rules of association, put them in a room and walk away. You know, that there's the rules of association will be actually part of a much larger package of information before you even get there.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have, you know, been introduced to what we're doing and a lot of these ideas before you ever get to looking at the rules of association. So it's not going to be the first thing people read.
I think I would turn that into a question that might help to decide what goes where. If someone, when we're talking to someone, or if someone becomes interested, what are they going to want to read first? Are
Mhm.
they going to ask for the bylaws first? Which could be, I have no idea, which is why I'm asking the question. You know, is that one of the first things that people will want to see, or like, yeah, what is the order? What is the order that would make sense for people to familiarize themselves with and become interested in being part of it?
Actually thinking through the onboarding.
Right.
This is actually
That's
because the bylaws we are going to establish then, and then that'll actually be part of what it means to bring somebody into the venture.
mm,
So yeah, that's a
Yeah, and I just read the equivalent of Arboretum co-housing a year after moving in. So, and some people never do. So,
yeah.
but
A lot of times you have to sign off on them and people will kind of go, "Please." You know, so
yeah.
anyway,
but
sorry.
I think we need to talk about like I, I don't totally understand nomenclature aside. I still don't think I understand the actual relationships between like so if there's only A, B, and C class of shares, but there's four classes of membership, help me understand how guests have class C shares, but if it's C, not D.
I'm gonna do a screen share because I put together the grid. Let me just figure out where I put it. I can show you the grid. I think this might help. Is it here? Yes. Okay. So hopefully this will help. Um, so the big deal between B shares and C shares are that the equity generally equity and access are in equal proportion. And so if this were going to be a homestead where everyone were going to be equal partners, then everyone would have 100 Class A shares and 100 Class B shares. And it would just be that you would have two share types that equal kind of conventional ownership of the property. But what we're doing is we're separating out the sort of legal status of the property from the having access to the property so that you could own access rights, but not own sort of legal ownership rights. Or you could own both. So what that means then is that basically we're dividing what in a conventional place would be like sort of the main share type. Everyone would have one of those, you know, or 100 of those share types. And we're just dividing out the obligations and the rewards that you would conventionally cluster all together into A and B. So does that help at all? And then class C is entirely other. It's like the community class of share where they're a nominal investment in the operation. You know, um, they're not intended to be sort of major stakeholders in it. So that's how the shares divide out. And if you think about it that as that, like, that means that there are timeshare croppers or farmers who own their whole own share, who have equal amounts of A and B shares. And then there are fair share sponsors who only have Class A shares. And there are the worker farmers who are trying to earn their equity who only have Class B shares. So everything else then just, kind of hangs off of that. So does that make sense?
It's helping. And I know we've talked about this multiple times, and but it needs to make sense in this document, and
It doesn't actually, so it doesn't have to make sense in this document because this is only the
well,
legal constitution, right? It
it
has
has to
to,
make enough sense that the lawyers can read it and tell us whether it will work or not, which I
right.
still think is a good question for them. Will this
Mhm.
fly legally? And I'm not sure that it is clear enough even for them to understand it yet.
I mean, it is literally another multi-stakeholder rules of association. These are the only questions that ever apply. And it is just based on exactly the same number of share classes and membership classes and different, ways of orienting it. So, it looks like any other rules of association.
So yeah, so they may totally be able to understand it because they're much more familiar with that than I am. Um,
I wonder if we can go through, if we can um there's something that is coming up that I don't think we've been able to report on. We're going to be meeting with Michelle, Ben. I think that would be useful information to share at this point, and I'm going to pass over to you to tell Becca who Michelle is and
I've
what.
actually been in the email loop about that, so
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
oh
that's
yeah,
great.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's
So I
also that's I'm out reaching out to the community land trust folks. Young Agrarians has a co-op person that we've met with, and we'll be sending this to them as well. Plus
Yeah, and
Michelle.
their take on whether this will work is more important in some. I mean, the legal, we have to get this stamp of approval from the lawyers to make it so. But I'm actually even more interested in whether they think this will work. Because
Mhm.
people say multi-stakeholder cooperatives are really hard. So talking to people who've been doing it,
mhm. Yeah, so I
they
feel
should
like
be.
we still have some information coming in. So what can we work on today? And I think, if we want to spend more time trying to work out the shares, that's perfectly fine. I'm just saying that that we're still in a process to establish. Anyway, I'm just trying to help, and I feel to make things move forward, and I'm maybe complicating it, so I will be quiet now.
No, it's just the challenge for me is I feel like you know, again, I feel like we're thinking that the bylaws are something that they aren't. We're thinking that the bylaws are a brochure, and they're not. They are, a legal document. Yes, we have to run it past the lawyers. And the challenge with multi-stakeholder co-ops, from what I've been reading and from what people have told me, is that it's hard to get a balance of interests at the board, in part because you have investors, employees, and customers. And
Uh-oh, did I lose you? Lost the sound again. Not hearing anything.
So figuring out how to get that culture back
Oh.
again.
I wonder if that will actually help.
What?
Well, there's a
There we
whole,
go.
like, are we on a different maybe it was the server, or I don't know how these things work.
Yeah.
Now I can hear you, but I missed
Okay.
a lot, I think.
Well, and I turned my video on because I wasn't even sure when it froze because there was no
Right,
way to
if you
tell.
can't see, yeah.
I lost it, like my whole Zoom closed down and then started up again.
Yeah, mine did too. So anyhow, the point that I was trying to make is that I think that we're confusing the purpose of the rules of association. And again, I think that I, I don't feel like this is kind of, bright siding or rose-colored glasses thinking, but we've talked about how we want it to work, and the question is this a container that would let that happen? It's really, and I think it's also, maybe here is another way of thinking about it. We're thinking about how we keep bad things from happening. Are we giving as much thought to how we make good things happen? Like,
Mm,
are we thinking about the bylaws and what they can make possible? Or are we only thinking about the bylaws as something that's going to keep bad things from happening?
mm,
And I think that there's, like, again, this is not going to be the brochure. We're not going to lead with our rules of association. We're going to lead with something else about this is how it works. And then I think if people know what a fair share, what a timeshare cropper is, and a caretaker and a fair share sponsor, if they understand that, then we can just say, yes, that means you need to buy this many shares of A and B. And this
mm,
is what that means. So they don't need to understand the bylaws as they're written. They just need to know how it works in operation.
Yeah, but the occasional person like me will actually try to read them and understand them to make sure
Yeah,
that we're not just saying, trust me, like, so, um,
but I mean, that's the thing. We aren't saying trust me because what this means is there are rights that come with Class B shareholders. And the only way that they relinquish those rights is to sell their shares to someone. And all of the shares are,
so, so what is commitment to pooling?
it's basically the employment profit sharing pool. So it's basically an enhanced time bank, but where it would be and actually the Stocksley, whatever the other one, they do this where it's profit sharing based on hours of work.
And is that a term that is used in other rules of association, or is that a term that
The
is
commitment
added?
pooling is not, but
Okay, so I think,
and we don't even really need to talk about it because it's really just the time tracking system. That's, all it would end up being is a time tracking system. And then patronage, officially what the profit sharing would come out as patronage. And that's how it gets translated
yeah,
into the
so I
bylaws.
think that we just need to make all the language really clear, and it's not clear without definitions. So commitment pooling is in here and it's not defined, and um
But
current par value is in here and it's not defined, maybe that's a standard thing in
that's a
the
standard thing.
legalese.
Yeah, that's
Um,
standard legalese.
I'm just kind of, for the sake of time, kind of skimming
Mm-hmm.
ahead
Yeah.
through the ones that I think are more substantive. Um, and now I see some comments from comments on comments. So there's a discussion about how restrictive the selling
Mm-hmm.
that I think was a substantive issue.
Well, and that one is the language gives us the option. And that is standard in a lot of other rules of association. It doesn't mean that we have to, but it gives us the choice if we want to. And it's the only way that you can guarantee that you don't have, somebody selling their share to a disruptive member who then becomes part of the organization without any vetting.
I see.
That's more of an insurance than applied.
Yeah, it's the same as the termination of membership. The grounds for termination probably very rarely ever get used, but they're in every rules of association. And they're also,
But
you can
why is there the clause that the stewards are not required to give any reason for refusing to consent to any such sale?
that's the legal way that it's said. you know and do you want to be in a position where you have to explain? Because if you have to give an explanation, then that opens you up to they didn't explain it the right way, or I didn't like their explanation, or that, so but anyhow, that's just lifted from every other rules of association.
And this is
Okay.
the way that you've composed this more or less is lifting and cutting and pasting and doing some translating of terms, right?
Yeah, for the most part, there's very little fresh content in there.
So that really the main so if you've done that, then this is from things that are operating and on record now. And mostly what we should be looking at, tell me if I'm wrong, what we should be looking at is how the translated terms work and how the parts work together, as opposed to the parts specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, and also with the parts, most of them can be like there's a standard form and then you can adjust it. Like I'm looking at the powers section 4.14, and I have highlighted the exceeding $100,000. That's one of those things where you can set that at any level you want. So in most of these, there's a kind of like people will serve for 1 year or 3 years or whatever, but there's a term of office clause. You have to say how long is the term of office, and then you can put in how much you want.
Okay.
Oh, and actually the one thing too that speaking of new the nominations for the Stewardship Council, we have a more complicated composition in the B-Law articles of incorporation than we have here. And I simplified it because that was kind of was simplifying everything. And it's in the same category of we can appoint people in a more complicated way, but we still have only these classes, if this is getting confusing. But anyhow, I just kind of threw in a placeholder in terms of the board composition. That's actually a substantive conversation, I think, because I just did a sort of one and one, or like there's 4 classes of members, so each one gets 1 to 4 seats. But we can make it more complicated if we want.
Mm.
And yeah, those are the places, and likewise, even in the shares, I didn't try to make that legal language. I thought that's something the lawyers could do. I just, knew that these are the 3 kinds of shares. And I tried to put some of the bullet points, figuring that the lawyers can figure out how to make that, sound right.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that there are questions about later, further down about that I had about if that is the structure of the stewardship council, what should the structure of the coordination circle be? Like, do
Right.
we want it to be, do we want to require distribution of the different members on the stewardship council also or not? I really don't know.
I think I commented on that. I can't remember. Because it was an interest.
Can you give me a number where you are?
I think it's 418.
Okay, cool.
Maybe that was a different one. Oh yeah, did it seem like the way it was structured, if I was reading it right, there could theoretically be only one
Yeah.
member of the stewardship council on the coordination circle.
Yeah, and that is, we don't want the stakeholder class doesn't make any sense on the coordination circle, because the coordination circle is really the operations, and so there are stakeholder groups that have very limited interest in the operations, right?
Yeah.
So and if they and anybody who may be interested in that. So remember, unlike other organizations, our stewardship council are all active members at the same time, right? So they aren't separate. They have to be actively engaged in the project. And their involvement on the coordination circle would be through their guild work, right? So the coordination circle is really representatives of each of the guilds. So they're coordinating the circles that have been established. So that's the function. The coordination circle has a different sort of orientation. And so it's not different people necessarily, but the way that you would get on the coordination circle is through the guilds, not through your membership status.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you were
the coordination circle is really just what we do every other Monday. Right. It's really just hearing from each of the guilds and trying to make decisions about where coordination has to happen.
So were you saying that the composition, that the section 4.5 is open to discussion about whether it should be for an equal numbers of stewards from each class?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's where I just kind of put it in, keep it really simple.
Yeah.
And again, in theory, because there's so much overlap, it's not like these are, wildly different groups of people with different competing interests. They all have sort of shared interests.
I mean, it's pretty different to be somebody who owns a financial stake but doesn't live there, to be somebody who lives there. I mean, my interests could differ from yours a lot at some point.
Well, possibly. But we still have a paired need, right? And I think that's where treating the land as the commonality, right? You own it, but we're caring for it. So you kind of need us to care for it in a way and we need you to make it possible for us to do the care. So we
Yeah.
have we have these overlapping interests, even though we have different perspectives on it. And that's the culture where it's like we're all caring for this property and we just have different roles. It's not like nobody is going to be an investor trying to maximize their profit. That's the big difference here. No one will be trying to make as much money as they can for themselves out of it.
No, but like with Stephanie now, and I could imagine myself in a situation in the future, somebody with a bunch of money in might feel a need to get the money out. So like the example of how restrictive is the agreement about selling, that we just had a little discussion about,
Mhm.
is a place where a person who doesn't live there but has a lot of money, or just the person who has a lot of money in versus a person who has a lot of time in, um, might the needs might differ, the felt needs might differ. I agree that underlying is that shared value about the land. Um, but if somebody needs to get their money out and you're saying, no, you can't sell it to this person, but there's no other buyer available, that's a conflict of interest, and it I mean it's a conflict between those interests. And
I think that's one of
The,
the, that was it. I wrote a little something, comment on, for that, because I think this is where, um, legalese and our language differs. The way that I took that passage was, um, that, it is a way of keeping things open enough that we can rely on the agreements and um the for lack of a better word, I'm never really good at remembering exact terms, but the process. And that the process that we're using and that we're developing is treating people like people, and where it's not just, we're not going to give you your money because we need it, and it's not just I need my money, I want to get out, but how do we actually have conversations so that we are all being treated like people.
Mhm.
So that clause that's how I was reading that clause in the bylaw, and I paused to read the clause because of the comment that was made on it, and I was like, oh, okay, this is actually this is a place of translation, and that's all I wanted to say.
mhm. Well, and the other thing too is that yeah, it's that is sort of assuming that the stewardship council will be unreasonable. That suddenly people will, start to want to interfere with other people. And that I think that the litmus test would always be, can people sign on to the agreements? Right. So can you live with the operating agreements? Can you live with the sociocracy and the blood, if you can, come on in. And if you can't, then they shouldn't be allowed in. And it's like, so if somebody wanted to sell, if somebody said, I just need to cash out and I'm going to sell to anybody, and this guy over here is going to give me money, but he is going to not, he's totally not willing to abide by any of the agreements, that seems like that would be something that we would have to stop, right? Like the good of
Yeah.
everyone else's investment is at risk by allowing that person to come in. So I mean, like that's what it's there for in those circumstances if somebody wanted to buy to somebody who couldn't actually join into the project. But that's hopefully this will be an attractive enough thing that there will be people who will want to be part of it.
Actually,
And
that's a
actually,
really interesting point that you're bringing up, Ben, because it's not only the person who wants to get their money out, but it's everyone who's involved in the project. So if we have several people who have large amounts of money that are in the project, and only one of them decides that they're going to sell and they can sell to whoever they want, then that imperils the investment of everyone else who has money in the project. And, I'm just using money because for me, personal time and investment is just as valuable as cash. But, just for the sake of argument, that this is, I think it's meant to prevent one person undercutting everybody else's investment in
Yeah.
whichever way they've invested.
Yeah.
So,
And there are
that
there
would
are
be, if
also
there are any amendments to that clause, I think it should be taken in that light. How to prevent one person from imperiling the project for everybody else.
well, and I think there's also a question for Bill and Elliot, because there are separate, I can't remember what they're called, but they're basically over and above your membership agreement. There's sort of like your understanding of the shares that you're purchasing, that you'll hold them for a certain amount of time, or that you're interested in some, that there's a way of kind of making an agreement around the selling and reselling of the shares. So that actually could be part of it, is, from a just having some sense of, is a person buying shares looking at some point to cash out, or are they, hopefully in it for the long haul, or are they, I'd like to be in for the long haul, but I also need my money at some point, like, um, so there's, again, that's part of the thing that I think can be negotiated separately from the bylaws. It doesn't have to go in the bylaws itself. And there's
Yeah, I need to get going, but I appreciate this conversation. I think that it's sort of bringing home to me how restrictive how specific the kind of people that are going to be willing to buy into this are, that could. I'm trying to balance that with the, like, Joey's random friends kind of investors types. And um I think that that kind of clause, restrictive clause, might turn off some people. And that, I hear you guys saying, yeah, those are the people we want to turn off. And I totally see that perspective. And what if it's not financially viable without those people? Is there a place to, is there some kind of compromise there? Or does it come down to representation on the stewardship council and, working, having really good process? But and I don't know, I could be borrowing trouble unnecessarily. Maybe people like that wouldn't read this carefully, and maybe if if the fantasy of Joey's friends ever materializes, maybe they'll be so wealthy that they don't, that this is play money for them.
Mhm.
I think
But
also the question for me with clauses like that is, how unusual are they really? Because and I
It's not
don't,
unusual at all.
and this is where consultation is, and not just with the lawyers. I think I'm curious about our meeting with Michelle on Monday as well. So this, is this an unusual clause? How is it applied? How has it been applied? That kind of thing is the type of information, is the type of question that comes up for me about it.
yeah.
And I do, there's I'll tell you, my first reaction is, if somebody wants us to remove the only protection that we have about making sure inappropriate people can't sabotage the project, and it's a choice between letting them in and making it financially viable or not, I would say, well, then the experiment has run its course. And we have found that there isn't enough appetite out there for people to work in a different way. And, you know, it's one property, it's, you know, 1,600 shares. It's not, you know, it's not a moon launch. And if we can't find enough people or enough resources to make something like that happen, that's useful information. You know, if we are so desperate that we have to say, sure, because you're rich, you get the poison pill. You get to kill us all if you want to. Um, then no, I'm not willing to do that anymore. I mean, I've been there. I've already been there where somebody says, well, yes, you can play your little game, but I get to come by and randomly run a bulldozer over it.
Well,
And
and
I'm just not
actually,
willing to do it.
and I'm just recalling we have heard other stories of that happening, that people went looking for um or started to accept money that ended up um ending their project or whatever.
Ending the project, yeah.
So definitely it is something that we need to think about, and we need to consciously agree that we want to attract the people who would be best suited to protect and feed this organism.
Yep. And you know, and it's balance, right? You know, it's like making space for legitimate needs and, you know, concerns and all of that, but making sure that it's balanced and figuring out, you know, I will wait if somebody shows up and says, for me, this is a deal breaker, and then we can have a conversation around it. But I don't want to, you know, start taking things out on the rare possibility that that person over there who might want to give us money might say something. So, anyhow,
All right,
I think
I
we still
need to
got to
get
talk to
going.
Heather too. So,
Yeah. And I think
and
the rest of my comments are probably just, I skimmed through them. They're probably just either extremely minor wording and numbering things, or, you know, things that I think we need to be clear about but aren't
mhm.
particularly controversial. So,
All right, onward and upward.
okay,
Thanks, gang.
take care.
Talk to you soonish.
And good luck with the canvassing. And take care.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you.
good luck. And thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, thank you. I
Yeah.
did my bit. It's in the mail.
Yay, yay. Check, you know, you can go to online and check to make sure it's been received.
I've got my tracking number from the post office. So, all right. Anyhow, see you soon.
Bye.